Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of the hour. Iran says it is prepared to dilute highly enriched uranium if the United States lifts all sanctions, according to its atomic energy chief. The statement comes as talks with Washington resume with no clarity on which sanctions would be removed. Downing Street says Prime Minister Keir Starmer will not resign and is focused on governing despite intense pressure over the Epstein scandal. The statement comes hours after his Chief of Staff and Communications Directors quit. Media tycoon Jimmy Lai is sentenced to 20 years in prison after being convicted of colluding with foreign forces and publishing seditious material. The verdict ends Hong Kong's largest national security case and fuels global concern. China says the sentence for Jimmy Lai is legitimate and lawful, insisting the case upholds the rule of law. The European Union, the United Nations and press freedom groups condemn the ruling, calling for Lai's immediate release and warning it undermines press freedom in Hong Kong. Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, calls on Iranians to show resolve ahead of the anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. He says national strength lies in the will of the people, urging unity against foreign pressure. The Prince and Princess of Wales say they are deeply concerned by newly released documents linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Kensington Palace says their focus remains on the victims as renewed scrutiny falls on figures tied to Epstein. Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi says the country will steadfastly protect its territorial waters and airspace. Speaking after a landslide election win, she pledges to strengthen defences and stresses self-reliance in national security. The European Union condemns Israeli decisions to tighten control of the West Bank and pave the way for more settlements. EU officials say the measures are a step in the wrong direction and undermine prospects for peace. We start with some news coming out of China and some breaking news. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson recently clarified that Beijing's policy towards Japan remains consistent despite the outcome of a recent Japanese election. The Chinese Ministry of Affairs spokesperson noted that while the election reflected deep-rooted issues and trends within Japan, China remains firm in its position. Moreover, the spokesperson warned any provocation or reckless actions against China will assert that the country will continue to defend its sovereignty and national interests. We start with some updates from Europe, and the Prince and Princess of Wales have expressed deep concern regarding the latest revelations surrounding Jeffrey Epstein, marking their first public statement on the ongoing scandal. A Kensington Palace spokesperson emphasised that Prince William and Princess Catherine are focused on the victims, especially after the release of new documents related to the late financier. The statement comes as new allegations surface about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, placing the royal family under increasing scrutiny. Although the brief statement did not directly reference Epstein or the prince's connections, it underlines the family's awareness of the unfolding controversy. The statement was released as Prince William prepares for a diplomatic visit to Saudi Arabia as the Epstein scandal looms large over royal engagements. Joining us now is Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He joins us live from Washington, DC. Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us here on the program. First of all, of course, Epstein and these revelations from these files span throughout the world. The United Kingdom, of course, being one country in particular which has been affected, with the likes of Prince Andrew, Peter Mandelson being centre of these controversies. What do you make in Britain's involvement in this scandal, whether it's Queen Elizabeth's apparent favourite son, or even a former minister, a former a former ambassador to the United States, and its implications that it's having on some of the UK's highest institutions?
Well, thanks very much, Thomas, for allowing me to comment on this and having me. You know, democracy requires more than just elections. It requires a faith in institutions of democracy, institutions which are supposed to promote transparency so you have an informed electorate, and promote the rule of law. Unfortunately, what has happened in regard to this whole Epstein situation is an undermining of the faith in institutions, whether they be in Britain or in the United States. The common man and woman, the average person, must have a faith that that the institutions are operating legitimately within the law, and that people who are not on the inside, if you will, can have access to information which allows them to make informed decisions. And of course, what we see in Britain and the United States is instead a cover-up, a lack of transparency, which is having dire consequences in the UK right now. In the United States, of course, President Trump and his administration have done everything they can to cover up any implications which would involve President Trump. So it's having a similar situation here, a similar undermining of faith in institutions. I predict that there is more to this story, and particularly in the United States with the upcoming midterm elections, there will be an impact.
And yeah, of course, I mean, you can't get much higher than the British royal family in the UK, of course, and we've seen Epstein have the highest links when it comes to that. What are your thoughts on the contrasting of the United Kingdom and the United States? Of course, Prince Andrew has had his titles removed. Peter Mandelson has been removed from the House of Lords. This compares to the United States. Of course, Donald Trump is criticised extremely frequently online and through opposition party members. However, true responsibility and true consequences seem to fall short. You have the likes of Howard Lutnick as well. He was also in the Epstein files, and his initial accounts were undermined as well. What does it show about the two democracies there? The contrast between the United States and the UK, and the responsibilities that those mentioned, and even when their statements were undermined, and the consequences for both countries.
Well, you know, we got rid of the king supposedly in 1776. But the reality is that the British are doing a better job of handling the situation and providing some insight into what has actually gone on. This is really in keeping with Britain playing a primary role in the development of democracy historically. Contrasting with what's happening in Britain is with what is happening in the U.S., where we have a wannabe king, if you will, in President Trump, who is moving in exactly the opposite direction of transparency and accountability. The ability of President Trump to distract from anything which is detrimental to his political standing is astounding. He is able, through Greenland, capturing of Maduro, the wide range of tariff problems, the deals that he supposedly are being made with Russia on Ukraine, is able to distract from this. And I would say he's more adept at reality television than the British royal family. And the consequence is that you're actually having more transparency, more concern, it seems to me, in Britain than you are in the United States.
Indeed. Raymond, do stay with us as we turn to a related development. And Maxwell's lawyer, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, David Marcus Oscar, says that Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted associate of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, intends to invoke her right to remain silent during questioning by the US House Oversight Committee. Maxwell is expected to appear virtually for a closed-door deposition from the Texas prison where she is serving a 20-year sentence for sex trafficking. According to Democratic Representative Ro Khanna, Maxwell will read a prepared statement at the outset of the deposition. Maxwell was convicted in 2021 for her role in luring underage girls for Epstein, her former boyfriend, to exploit. Meanwhile, she's also seeking a pardon from Trump and has been accused of lying to federal officials. Raymond joins us once again. Raymond, in what world would Donald Trump grant Ghislaine Maxwell a pardon? Of course, the entire world has seen the media surrounding Jeffrey Epstein, knows her crimes. Why would Donald Trump give her a pardon after this deposition?
Well, why would he give a pardon to those people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th? Why would he give a pardon to one of the chief drug runners in terms of Central America? President Trump acts only in his self-interest in regard to these matters, in a calculated attempt to deflect any blame, anything which is adverse to him. So, in return for Maxwell keeping her mouth shut, he might very well consider a pardon. President Trump is an expert at lawfare. And lawfare, like warfare, is to use the law as a sword against those that he does not favor in retribution, and a shield for his own activities. So he might very well consider this. As you know, the Trump administration, through the Department of Justice, has already gotten Maxwell to a prison, which is more like a country club than a prison. And doubtlessly there are connections in terms of Maxwell saying that she will invoke her Fifth Amendment rights and not testify really to Congress. So this is all in keeping with the way in which the Trump administration has conducted itself in regard to the Epstein situation.
Raymond Vickery, do stay with us once again as we turn over to more news coming out of Washington. And a U.S. Republican Senator for Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, in a recent delegation visiting Nuuk, Greenland, has said that the people of Greenland were friends of the United States and that President Donald Trump's comments about acquiring the territory had damaged trust with the inhabitants of the Arctic island. However, Democratic Senator for Michigan, Gary Peters, has said that the people of Greenland are our friends and the people of Denmark are our friends. And when you have friends, you respect that relationship. While Lisa Murkowski, Gary Peters and Angus King have responded, let's listen in to what they had to say.
My party who don't want to be seen as engaging in anything that might be viewed as contrary to President Trump's initiative or desire, and so who may not be speaking out publicly on the issue of Greenland specifically. But I will tell you, I have had more than my share of conversations with fellow Republicans who have said there is a red line when it comes to occupying, owning, controlling, taking over Greenland.
And the people of Greenland are our friends. The people of Denmark are our friends. And when you have friends, you respect that relationship, you trust each other, and that's what we have to do as a country. Unfortunately, we have a president that has broken that trust. I think, in a significant way, and we now have to repair it.
We don't know much except that they have been respectful and that they are focusing on the right issues, which is security. But I think there's only been one or two meetings, so I think it's still very preliminary. But I think the president's change of rhetoric at Davos reflected to some significant extent what we've seen among our constituents and the political atmosphere in the United States, where there was little or no support for this idea that.
Raymond Vickery joins us once again. Raymond, this was a bipartisan delegation that visited Greenland. Not the first time that this has happened during this entire saga. Of course, it's easy for one to forget about this because, of course, headlines are moving so fast nowadays. Do you think this is over? Is Donald Trump's claims to the island over? And is there now, or was there ever an appetite for the island?
Thanks for allowing me to comment on this. I don't think it's over. President Trump does not forget in terms of people who have gone against him. He does not forget his overall goals in terms of trying to have an imperial view of the United States. He hasn't forgotten about Greenland. He hasn't forgotten about Canada and the 51st state. He hasn't forgotten about Venezuela and taking over its oil. He hasn't forgotten about the Panama Canal. Unfortunately, President Trump's mindset is a throwback to imperial views of the 19th century. What you see with this congressional delegation is a few senators who've then there also was a delegation who went directly to Denmark, who were trying to show some conscience and do cleanup behind President Trump and his worst really attack on the foundations of NATO and the security alliance for the North Atlantic since its founding. So unfortunately, you only have Lisa Murkowski as a Republican willing to speak out. She says other Republicans believe the same thing, that it's a red line. But are any of those Republicans speaking out? No, they are not. Nevertheless, I think it is true that you have seen President Trump dial down and try to get an off-ramp here, at least temporarily, because the position that somehow the United States should take over Greenland by force or really coercion of any kind is a non-starter with the large majority of voters in the United States. So this is, again, looking toward the midterms here in 2026, but it is not a change in mindset, unfortunately, for President Trump.
Raymond Vickery, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you here on NewsX World. We turn now to some breaking news coming in, and the European Union has proposed removing 2 Chinese banks from its sanctions list, while adding financial institutions from Laos, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan for providing crypto asset services to Russia. Additionally, the EU is proposing sanctions on 42 new vessels, predominantly oil tankers tied to Russia's shadow fleet, as a part of broader crackdown on Russia. Meanwhile, another significant move includes adding Kulevri port in Georgia and Karimun port in Indonesia to the sanctions list for their role in handling Russian oil exports. These proposals are part of the ongoing pressure on Russia amidst the war in Ukraine. We turn to North America now, and Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has blasted US threats of tariffs on countries supplying oil to crisis-stricken Cuba, saying the measure would strangle the communist nation's people. This comes after the US president signed an executive order declaring a national emergency and laying the groundwork for such tariffs, ratcheting up the pressure to topple the communist government in Havana. The new tariff policy comes as Cuba struggles with increasingly severe blackouts. Sheinbaum said the tariffs could directly affect hospitals, food supplies and other basic services for the Cuban people. Sheinbaum has repeatedly said the decision of whether to send oil to Cuba is a sovereign one, but the country's economy is heavily dependent on exports to the United States and therefore vulnerable to tariffs. Peter Cardillo joins us now, the chief economist at Spartan Capitals. He joins us live from New York. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter. The United States says that these tariffs are about pressuring Havana, but in reality, are they more about deterring third countries like Mexico from defying Washington's Cuba policy? Okay, I believe you're muted, Peter. Unfortunately, we can't hear you. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay, fine. All right. Well, obviously, the aim is to bring down the regime. So President Trump is doing what any president would do in order to try to bring down a regime that's certainly not friendly, or a regime that such as the Cuban regime, which is communism. And so the pressure is on. And of course, it means hardship for the Cuban population. But by the same token, if the regime would to come down, that means that, there should be better days ahead for the Cuban population.
And historically, of course, the United States has the world's longest embargo on any country when it comes to Cuba. Historically, have sanctions and trade restrictions weakened the Cuban government or mainly hurt ordinary Cubans?
Well, sanctions work and they don't work. Sanctions, many nations could just go around them. We see that with sanctions against Russian oil, and yet it doesn't seem to really faze the government because they're able to work around them. And so that brings us back to the other discussion, right, where Trump is doing everything in his power to bring down this regime. And so you yourself just mentioned that Cuba has the longest sanctions against any other country. And yet they seem to survive one way or another. Of course, they're a hardship for the people. There's no question about that. But as a government, they've been around for a long time. And so, we just have to wait and see what it really boils down to. Now, of course, at one point or another, if you get to the point where, just for instance, go back to the years of just before the revolution, right? People were suffering and they decided to go a different route. And so perhaps this could happen again. And the more louder you get, the better the chances are of regime change.
Peter, could these tariffs accelerate de-dollarization and pushing countries to trade oil outside the US financial system and to avoid exposure?
It's very possible. It's nothing new. Over the past 2 years, we've seen that happen. We've seen, for instance, India, the EU, make deals with other trading partners. So, yeah, of course that can happen.
Peter Cardillo, thank you so much for joining us here on NewsX. Well, it's a great pleasure to speak to you on the programme, as always. We now turn over to the African continent, and the United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk reported that nearly 100 civilians were killed and 140 injured in drone strikes in Sudan's Kordofan region between January the 22nd and February the 6th. These strikes, conducted by Sudan's army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, targeted civilian areas, including a World Food Programme convoy, markets, health facilities and residential neighbourhoods. Turk described the situation as a grave human rights violation and drew a parallel with the preventable atrocities that occurred in Sudan's El Fasher last year. He expressed a deep concern that such abuses could be repeated in Kordofan, urging the international community to take immediate action. Joining us now is Major General Siddhartha G, a senior geopolitical and strategic defence expert, joining us live from Jaipur. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, it's a great pleasure to speak to you. The United Nations here once again saying that over 100 civilians were killed in the Kordofan region of Sudan. What more can you tell us about this conflict? We're seeing numbers coming out again and again, mainly from the United Nations, these United Nations watchdogs, consistently releasing these devastating figures coming out of the conflict in Sudan. Why is nothing happening? Why is nothing developing?
Thomas, good evening. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay. Firstly, we have to understand where Sudan is. Geography has to be understood, and across the Red Sea, which are the countries actually having borders with the Red Sea. And there is a global perspective, there is a regional perspective, there is also local perspective. But what is of relevance is the regional and the local perspective. In case of local perspective, the situation has gone out of hand. The RSF and Sudanese armed forces, they are at one point in time in 2023, they had agreed to actually come together and fight for unity and for a common aim and objective for the growth and prosperity of the country. But somehow that has fallen apart because of lack of trust, and both the leaders, the Sudanese army and the RSF leader, they are part of the same armed forces and they are fighting against each other. So that means the lack of trust has led to a kind of a polarization within the society. As a result, the civilians are being targeted, unfortunately. This is beyond the kind of atrocities that can be ever imagined. And like the narrative which has just been shared by the United Nations representative, I think it's about time the United Nations must actually launch a mission, a military mission, to prevent violence spreading further and resulting in total annihilation or a kind of a genocide or cleansing of the ethnic tribes, which is appearing to be very, very potent and likely to take place in near future. So therefore, prevention is better than cure. United Nations must come in with a mission-oriented objective and a mission represented by military observers with the Article 7. That is, they will be entitled to use force to prevent any kind of escalation of the violence. Back to you, Thomas.
Major General G, do stay with us as we turn to our next story. We move, and India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri addressed the concerns about the country's oil imports and its relationship with Russia. He emphasized that India is not dependent on any single source for energy and does not intend to be. Misri explained that as a developing economy, India imports about 80 to 85% of its oil and gas, and it is essential to manage energy costs to avoid inflation. He pointed out that the country's energy import policy is driven by the goal of providing secure, reliable and affordable energy for its consumers. Misri further highlighted that global energy markets face significant uncertainties which affect sourcing decisions. He added that India aims for a diversified energy mix, with oil companies making decisions based on market conditions, availability and risk assessments. Listen into a part of his statement.
Our approach is to maintain multiple sources of supply and diversify them as appropriate to ensure stability. Therefore, I would say that the more diversified we are in this area, the more secure we are. Insofar as actual sourcing of energy is concerned, again, all of you follow this closely, so you know that the actual sourcing is done by oil companies in the public sector, oil companies in the private sector. And they make decisions based on market conditions. They assess availability at any given point in time. They assess risks. They assess costs in this process. And obviously, all of these companies also have their own internal accountability related processes to look at, and certain fiduciary responsibilities in the market.
Major General Sardar G joins us once again to discuss this. What are your thoughts here from the statement that we've just heard? Do you think this might aggravate the Russians?
No, not really, because look at it from a different perspective. First and foremost, it is not 80 to 85%. The oil being imported from outside India as on today is approximately 87.7%. That is one. Number two, when you import such a large volume of oil and gas from outside the country, then obviously you cannot actually, focusing on one source. It has to be multiple sources. But given the fact that prior to 2022, before Russia invaded Ukraine, it has to be understood in clear terms that the percentage of oil import from Russia used to be just about 1.6 to 2.1%. But by and by, it started picking up, became 13% by middle of 2022. By early 2023, it had already crossed 24%. And by September 2024, it had reached a peak of 41%. And this 41% gradually, when US started putting pressure, that is with Donald Trump coming back to power 2.0, that India is buying oil from Russia, which is fueling the conflict in Ukraine, notwithstanding the fact that America is doing business. The business with America, between America and Russia, has gone up more than 25 to 30 times after Donald Trump assumed his 2.0 presidency. So they are buying uranium, they are buying multiple kinds of mineral earth, the rare earth elements, etc., etc. And European Union is also buying the gas, LNG. 37% of its requirement is still being bought from Russia, and so is other minerals and rare earth element. So therefore, India still, if we have to explain things, from 41% in September 2024, it has already come down to 31% in December 2025. And as we are talking, in the month of end of January 2026, the percentage has come down to 27%. Because I am not talking about defending the strategic autonomy. It is a matter of business. So where does it take me to? It takes me to 2 points. That US wanted us to not to buy oil from Iran. We stopped it. From 2007, the percentage of import from Iran by India used to be 17%, and by 2017, it had already come to 0. And come the year 2019, similar kind of embargo was imposed in India to buy oil from Venezuela. Venezuela being what it is, we stopped buying from Venezuela. Now we've taken a complete turnaround. Now they put pressure that stop buying oil from Russia India had gone to Russia at the behest of America so as to stabilize the international oil prices in the market. So notwithstanding all this, even if Donald Trump is making it an ego issue, if India has to do it, India is already reducing the quantum of oil being bought from Russia and trying to shift its basis to diversifying towards America, towards Venezuela. There is no issue. The issue also has to be understood from another perspective, that whenever there is a business, it is not government to government. The government of India is not procuring or buying oil from source A, B, C. These are companies which are operating the oil rigs, and the companies in India are importing. That the Foreign Secretary has actually gone an extra mile to explain the finer aspects, which I really admire and appreciate. That's the way to go. Hope the American advisors and the people and the leadership, they are understanding the complexity through which India has to navigate, because it is not the government of India which has to take a decision. It is the company which has to take a decision whether to import or not, driven by multiple invisible factors, and so as to meet the aspiration and the requirement of 1.45 billion people of India. If this is what is not understood by Donald Trump, well, any amount of discussion will fall flat in your channel, because he is not going to understand, his advisors will not understand. India is prepared, India is amenable. Strategic autonomy is a different issue. It is a matter of requirement of the 1.45 billion people of India. This has to actually get into his head. Only then that he will keep quiet.
Major General Satakji, thank you so much for taking the time in joining us here on NewsX World. We have some breaking news coming out of North America. And a 37-year-old Indian Canadian has died after being shot by unidentified men in the parking lot of a busy shopping centre in Toronto. Police arrived at the scene to find the man suffering from gunshot wounds and rushed him to hospital with life-threatening injuries. The victim has been identified as a 37-year-old man. His name is Chandan Kumar, from a native village in Karnataka, India. However, the victim later succumbed to his injuries, and the suspects fled the scene in the vehicle, and authorities are now investigating the incident. The shooting has raised concerns about public safety in the city. US Ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, credited the personal friendship between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi for securing a landmark interim trade agreement. Under the new framework announced earlier in February, US tariffs on Indian goods were slashed from 50 to 18%. The agreement aims to remove both tariffs and non-tariff barriers, opening India's market to American industrial and agricultural products while strengthening resilient supply chains. Gore described the India-US relationship as having limitless potential, noting that the best is yet to come for what he called the most consequential global partnership of this century. Let's in fact listen in to what Sergio Gore had to say.
The lights that I can see. I've been here just a little over a month, and we hit the ground running. The White House is paying attention to India. Our president is paying attention to India. And thanks to the friendship that President Trump has with Prime Minister Modi, we were able to get the trade deal across the finish line.
Franjo von Allmen from Switzerland had an incredible Olympic run, winning his second gold medal in just 48 hours. This time Allmen teamed up with Tanguy Neff to take gold in the men's team confined event in alpine skiing. Although von Allmen wasn't the fastest in the downhill leg, Neff nailed the slalom, helping in securing the win. This victory came right after von Allmen's gold in the downhill event 2 days earlier. Other skiers like Marco Odermatt and Loic Meliard also gave strong performances, but it was von Allmen who won the game, creating history for Switzerland. We'll of course continue to bring all the updates coming out of the Winter Olympics as we get them, but for now that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.